What if I told you that the largest welfare recipient in America isn't actually a person?
Right, it's a $500 billion corporation.
Yeah, I mean, when you see that iconic yellow smiley face bouncing across your TV screen, or, you walk through those sliding glass doors under the banner of everyday low prices, you're looking at what feels like the ultimate symbol of American consumer efficiency.
Oh, absolutely. It's an institution.
It really is. But today, our mission for this deep dive is to look at the hidden machinery operating just behind that smiley face.
And to do that, we're drawing from a really fascinating cross-section of data today. Our sources span everything from grassroots labor forums, like the work reform subreddit.
Always an interesting place for insights.
Definitely. And we also have reports from the Port Angeles Food Bank, some journalism from Matched, a Wikipedia compilation of criticisms, and comprehensive databases of corporate financial filings and legal records.
Which is exactly why I want to establish our ground rules right out of the gate here. Because some of the data we're looking at today touches on pretty politically charged topics.
Right, things like the social safety net, corporate taxes, unionization.
Yeah, and our job today isn't to judge the politics of these issues, or to tell you what to believe or whose side to take. We're simply going to lay out the bare mechanics of how this retail empire actually runs, based purely on what the original source materials say.
We're just following the data.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are going to trace the true cost of a low price, starting with the American taxpayer, moving onto the store floor, traveling overseas to the supply chain, and finally ending up right back in your shopping cart.
It is a complex ecosystem. I mean, when you look at how a corporation manages a massive domestic workforce and a sprawling global supply chain, you realize that an everyday low price doesn't just happen because of, good bulk purchasing.
Right.
It requires an incredibly rigid structural approach to human labor.
So let's start with that staggering claim I mentioned at the top. The data from the Port Angeles Food Bank, which is corroborated by widespread discussions on Reddit, points out that Walmart is often considered America's biggest welfare recipient.
Which sounds completely wild.
Right. On the surface, it sounds like a paradox. How does a company generating hundreds of billions in revenue collect welfare?
Well, it comes down to a business model that essentially relies on public infrastructure to subsidize its private payroll. So Walmart is the largest employer of SNAP recipients in the country.
And SNAP being the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or, food stamps.
Correct. Because if a company pays wages right at the legal minimum and they carefully manage employee schedules to keep them just below the threshold for full-time benefits.
Then a massive portion of their workforce will legally qualify for government aid.
Precisely. The burden of feeding and providing health care for those workers shifts from the employer's balance sheet directly to the American taxpayer. But the sources highlight that this isn't just a passive side effect. The corporation actually benefits from this dynamic in a loop that generates what you could call a triple profit.
Okay, a triple profit. Break that down for me.
So the first profit is obvious. If the state ensures your workers don't go hungry, you don't have to raise your baseline wages to cover their actual cost of living.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
The taxpayer is essentially covering the gap between what the worker earns and what it actually costs to survive. But how does that turn into a secondary profit?
Through the automated harvesting of federal tax incentives, there's a program called the Work Opportunity Tax Credit. The federal government offers companies up to $9,600 in tax credits for hiring individuals who rely on public assistance.
Wait, let me make sure I'm getting this. The taxpayer is subsidizing the wages so the company doesn't have to pay as much, and then the government gives the company a tax break specifically because they employ people whose wages are subsidized.
That is the structural reality, yeah. When a corporation of this size processes new hires, their onboarding systems are designed to identify applicants who receive state aid. By hiring them, which they need to do anyway to staff the stores, they generate the documentation to claim these massive tax credits.
That is, wow. And the third part of this loop, let me guess, it has to do with where those food stamps are actually spent.
You're exactly right. Roughly 1 in every 4 SNAP dollars distributed in the United States is spent at Walmart.
1 in 4.
Yeah. The government distributes the funds to the low-wage workers, and those workers spend a massive percentage of those funds right back at the store.
That's incredible.
According to internal documents shared by employees, the company has even provided classes during staff meetings on how to navigate the state bureaucracy and apply for these government benefits.
It functions exactly like the 19th century company store in old coal mining towns.
No, that's a good comparison.
Yeah, back then, the miners were paid in scrip, which was this fake currency that could only be redeemed at the boss's shop.
Hmm.
You worked for the company, and you bought your groceries from the company, meaning the money never really left the owner's pockets.
Right.
But let me challenge this for a second. Is this a deliberately malicious strategy to, like, drain public resources? Retail is notoriously ruthless. Margins are razor thin. Is it possible this is just the harsh mathematical reality of keeping a massive brick-and-mortar operation afloat?
What's fascinating here is that whether it's intentionally malicious or just a byproduct of ruthless efficiency, the macroeconomic outcome is identical. It's a mechanism of externalization. The company has successfully insulated itself from the true cost of human labor by outsourcing that cost to the social safety net.
So if the overarching strategy relies on this unyielding control over macro payroll costs, how does that control translate to the actual physical store floor? Because you can't just cap wages,
Yeah.
to extract maximum productivity from the hours you do pay for.
Yeah, and this is where we look at the daily reality for the workers, which the sources describe as an environment engineered for intense surveillance and labor suppression.
The surveillance aspect really caught my attention in the sources. In 2018, Walmart filed a patent titled Listening to the Front End.
Oh, yes. The audio surveillance.
Right. They proposed installing audio surveillance technology directly at the cash registers. And the documentation shows this wasn't just to listen for the beep of a barcode scanner. They wanted to capture the audio of the ambient environment, including the conversations between the cashiers and the customers.
Yeah, the mechanism described in the patent is purely about generating performance metrics. By analyzing the audio data, like the pauses between items being scanned or the amount of chatter, they can theoretically calculate the exact efficiency of a human interaction.
So it reduces a conversation between a cashier and a regular customer to a data point.
Exactly. A data point that either needs to be optimized or eliminated.
And that obsession with total control clearly extends to how workers organize. The sources document some pretty severe anti-union tactics. Showing anti-union videos during orientation is pretty standard corporate practice, but the operational shifts are what blew my mind.
Right. When workers manage to push through that surveillance and successfully organize, the corporate response isn't to negotiate.
No. In 2004, a store in Quebec successfully unionized. And 5 months later, the company completely closed the store.
They utilize operational restructuring as a weapon against bargaining. We saw the exact same mechanism in 2000.
With the meat cutters, right?
Yeah. Meat cutters at a supercenter in Jacksonville, Texas, voted to unionize. Very shortly after, the corporation announced it was eliminating in-house meat-cutting jobs nationwide, moving entirely to prepackaged meat.
They eliminated an entire job category across the whole country just to neutralize a single localized union vote.
They claimed it was a pre-planned cost-cutting measure, of course, but a National Labor Relations Board judge reviewed the timeline and the mechanics of the decision and later ordered the company to restore the meat department structure and bargain with the union.
The lengths they go to maintain that leverage are just extreme. And here's where it gets really interesting and honestly disturbing, is how this prioritization of cost-cutting bleeds directly into basic human safety. The compilation of legal records outlines historical practices where night shift employees were physically locked inside the stores.
Yeah, the rationale provided for that was loss prevention, stopping employee theft and protecting the inventory in high-crime areas.
But the mechanical result of that policy was that employees were trapped. The manager with the keys was often off-site.
Right. There were instances where employees couldn't leave during medical emergencies or even during hurricanes in Florida because the doors were padlocked from the outside.
And the Mashed article highlights a similar algorithmic approach to safety equipment. They detail massive wage theft lawsuits for forcing employees to work off the clock. But more shocking is the documented lack of basic medical equipment in many locations. Specifically, automated external defibrillators, or AEDs.
Yeah, this wasn't a simple oversight. When you have stores the size of small aircraft carriers, medical emergencies will inevitably happen.
Of course.
But equipping every store with an AED and training staff to use them represents a fixed cost.
And because they didn't want to absorb that cost, there were tragic, entirely preventable customer deaths in Missouri and Canada. Frantic families were running around massive supercenters and couldn't access a basic defibrillator.
It's awful.
But let me push back here again because scale is important. They employed 2.2 million people worldwide. That is the population of a small country. Statistically speaking, aren't you going to have a few rogue managers who lock a door or a few stores that forget to order an AED? Are we just looking at a few bad apples being blown out of proportion by critics?
It is tempting to dismiss them as isolated incidents, but the structural analysis in the sources reveals a systemic pattern. It all stems from how the corporation evaluates and compensates its local management.
Okay, how so?
Well, a local store manager doesn't control the price of the merchandise, and they don't control the rent on the building. The single largest controllable expense on their profit and loss sheet is labor.
So they are evaluated almost entirely on their sales to payroll ratio.
Exactly. When the corporate office demands year-over-year cost reductions, they squeeze the local manager. And the only lever that manager can pull is shaving hours, understaffing shifts, or skipping the purchase of safety equipment.
Wow.
The corporate metric treats labor and safety purely as a cost driver, not a value driver. The system inherently pressures managers to cut corners just to hit their algorithmic target.
It functions almost like a monopsony.
Yeah.
If you are the only major employer in a rural town and you are aggressively suppressing wages and squeezing safety budgets to absolute zero, you're going to hit a floor eventually.
Right.
Even with all these tactics, there are still strict domestic labor laws in the U.S. So when they can't squeeze any more profit out of an American cashier, that immense pressure has to go somewhere. Which brings us to the global supply chain.
Yeah. The human cost of that pressure becomes exponentially more severe when applied to overseas suppliers. The sources provide a really clinical look at the factories producing these everyday low prices.
The National Labor Committee report on the Chenxi handbag factory in China is just harrowing. This factory produced Kathy Lee branded handbags for Walmart. The mechanical reality of this factory was a 98-hour work week.
It's hard to even fathom that.
That is 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the average take-home wage was 3 cents an hour.
The control mechanisms there go far beyond audio surveillance, too. Upon hiring, workers had their identification documents confiscated by armed guards.
Good grief.
Yeah, and without identification, they couldn't legally leave the factory premises without risking arrest by the local police.
And the financial structure was basically indentured servitude. The workers were charged by the factory for their dismal food and for incredibly cramped dorm rooms where 16 people shared a single space.
Which they couldn't afford.
Exactly. Because those deductions were taken out of that 3 cent an hour wage, 46% of the workers earned absolutely nothing. They worked a 98-hour week and ended the month in debt to the company.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it traces back to the foundational purchasing policy of the corporation. It operates as a reverse auction. Walmart demands that its suppliers lower their prices year over year.
It's like pressing down on a balloon. If you squeeze cost to absolute zero here in the U.S., the pressure just blows up on the other side of the world.
Right.
Because if I own a factory and Walmart buys 40% of my output, losing their contract means I go bankrupt.
Right.
So when they demand I make a shirt for a penny less this year and another penny less next year, I have to comply.
But the math is unforgiving. Eventually, you can't buy cheaper cotton. You can't make the sewing machines run any faster. The only variable left to cut is building maintenance, safety standards, and human rights.
Yeah.
The corporate policy of demanding endless price reductions inherently mandates the creation of sweatshops.
Which explains the broader international disasters we see in the legal records. Like the New York Times investigation showing Walmart to Mexico paid $16 million in bribes to local officials.
Yeah, that was a massive scandal.
They were paying to aggressively expedite store permits. This included a $52,000 bribe, specifically to alter a zoning map so they could build a supercenter near the ancient Mayan pyramids in Teotihuacan.
The pressure to expand and cut costs just completely overrides basic legal and ethical frameworks. But the most devastating example of this is the 2012 Rana Plaza fire in Bangladesh. 112 workers died in a garment factory because the doors were locked and there were no fire escapes.
And labor activists found Walmart-branded clothing in the ashes. The corporation claimed they didn't know, right? That a supplier had subcontracted the work without authorization.
They did claim that. But documents later revealed multiple suppliers had been using that specific factory for Walmart apparel for an entire year. The complex web of subcontracting isn't a glitch in the supply chain, it's a feature.
I see.
It allows the massive corporation at the top to demand impossibly low prices while maintaining plausible deniability when the supplier inevitably violates safety laws to hit those prices.
So the domestic workers are subsidizing the bottom line, and the overseas suppliers are paying a devastating physical price. But if we pivot to the end of this cycle, is the consumer at least getting the honest deal they were promised? If I walk into the store, am I actually getting the bargain I see on the shelf?
The sources say no. The pursuit of margin optimization doesn't stop at the supply chain. It extends directly to the psychology of the consumer.
Right, the legal sources list a frankly exhausting string of consumer deception cases. Regulators in states like New Jersey have fined them for bait-and-switch pricing, where the algorithmic price at the register inexplicably rings up higher than the physical price advertised on the shelf.
We've all probably experienced that at some point.
Oh, for sure. Then there are the truth in advertising lawsuits for slapping fake, made-in-USA labels on clearly imported products. They even created and sold a fake craft beer.
Oh, the Trouble Brewery.
Yes, they labeled it as being brewed by the Trouble Brewery, implying it was a premium small batch local product. But Trouble Brewery didn't exist. It was just mass-produced corporate beer rebranded with a higher perceived value to trick the consumer.
Those examples demonstrate a willingness to manipulate perceived value, but the consumer deception reached a critical and really tragic peak at the pharmacy counter. The legal filings detail how the company was sued by the Department of Justice and ultimately forced to pay a $3.1 billion settlement for its structural role in the opioid crisis.
We're talking about $3.1 billion. How does a retail supply chain algorithm implicate itself in a public health epidemic?
It returns to the exact same mechanism we discussed with the store managers, the intense, metric-driven pressure to drive sales volume above all else. The Department of Justice lawsuit outlined that corporate compliance officers systematically ignored blaring red flags in the pharmacy data.
Because flagging a suspicious prescription slows down the line.
Precisely. They pressured their local pharmacists to process and fill prescriptions as fast as humanly possible to maintain volume. When those licensed pharmacists raised concerns about suspicious doctors who were clearly operating pill mills, those medical concerns were treated as operational bottlenecks.
Unbelievable.
Corporate managers, whose primary directive was to increase sales, routinely overrode the pharmacists.
They placed the algorithm of sales volume above the medical judgment of their own staff.
And they fueled a nationwide crisis in the process.
So what does this all mean? We are looking at an empire that utilizes taxpayer money to fund its payroll, engineers surveillance to suppress labor, drives global suppliers to the point of structural collapse, and pays billions in federal fines for overriding medical professionals to push pills. Yet the parking lots are completely full. Millions of people are going to shop there today. Why does this model work so flawlessly?
This raises an important question, and it forces an analysis of the psychology of convenience and economic leverage. This corporation has embedded itself so deeply into the infrastructure of the American landscape that for a vast number of communities, it has systematically eliminated the competition.
Right.
They have engineered an environment where the immediate, tangible benefit to the shopper saving a few dollars on groceries completely masks the massive, distributed costs paid by the taxpayer, the warehouse worker, and the global supply chain.
It is an incredibly effective magic trick. You look at the receipt and see the savings, but the actual cost has just been shifted somewhere you can't see it.
The fundamental product they are selling is the externalization of consequences.
Let's trace the path we've taken today. We started by following the money through the S&P loop, looking how the social safety net is utilized to subsidize corporate payroll. We analyzed the mechanics of the store floor, from audio surveillance patents at the register to algorithmic scheduling that punishes local managers for investing in basic safety.
Right.
We looked at the monopsony power of the global supply chain, forcing overseas factories into a reverse auction that ends in locked fire doors and 3-cent wages. And finally, we followed it back to the pharmacy counter, where the mandate for sales volume overrode the safety of the community.
It is a vast, interconnected machine functioning exactly as it was designed to function.
And to you listening to this right now, the mechanics of this machine matter to your life. Whether you shop at one of these supercenters every single week or you intentionally avoid them entirely, your local tax dollars, the baseline wages in your zip code, and the safety protocols of your local pharmacy are inextricably linked to this retail giant's business model. You don't have to be a customer to be a part of their ecosystem.
I want to leave you with one final piece of data from the sources to consider. In 2014, researchers at the University of South Carolina and Sam Houston State University conducted a study on crime rates during the 1990s.
Okay.
Across the United States during that decade, crime rates were dropping significantly. But the data revealed a glaring anomaly. Communities that had a Walmart store saw significantly less of a decrease in crime compared to towns that didn't.
Wait, really? The physical presence of the store actually stunted the drop in local crime.
The data strongly suggested it, and the researchers hypothesized this was tied to a mechanism called social capital.
Social capital.
Yeah, communities that rely heavily on a massive, centralized corporate entity inevitably experience a decline in local civic engagement. When independent local Main Street business owners are forced out and replaced by a rotation of distant corporate managers, a community loses the specific citizens who have the time, the financial resources, and the deeply vested interest to advocate for the town's well-being.
Wow. When the profits leave the town, the civic engagement leaves with it.
Exactly. So the question you have to ask yourself when looking at the mechanics of this business model is this. When a town trades its local economic independence for the extreme convenience of a single corporate giant, are they giving up more than just a few mom-and-pop shops? Are you actually sacrificing the social fabric and the very safety of your own hometown?
That is definitely something to mull over. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, and we'll see you next time.